Fat mail-order bride, humiliated at market, mountain man said, "You're the queen I've been waiting for." Consider our agreement null and void. Bartholomew Ashford's voice sliced across the Saturday bustle of Copper Falls Market as he unfolded a letter like a warrant. Stalls fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause among the bunting. Evangeline Murphy, Ava, 27, in the blue dress she'd hemmed in a Chicago boarding house, stood with a wicker basket hooked in her elbow, apples shining like small suns within. She had been led here to be introduced to the community. Instead, the community gathered to watch her be unmade. She misrepresented herself, Bartholomew announced, lifting his chin toward Mrs. Henderson and the banker, Cornelius Blackwood. The photograph was slender. The reality is not. A dry titter skittered over cobbles. Mrs. Henderson's perfume and disdain arrived together. "My dear, do you understand that deceiving a gentleman is a species of fraud?" "I sent my true likeness," Ava said, hands tight around the basket handle. Shame flared hot. Dignity stood its ground. Blackwood adjusted his cuffs, eyes cold. "We all saw the image, Ashford, a willowy girl, not this." Bartholomew produced his letter and read, righteous as a judge. "Miss Murphy, our engagement is dissolved at once. I cannot wed a woman who misled me from the start." Apples thudded from Ava's basket, rolling under boots. A boy chased one. A woman nudged another aside with the toe of her shoe as if it might stain. "Please," Ava managed, voice steady by force of will alone, "you met me at the depot. You knew who I was." "I saw enough," he said, and with a flick of his wrist, the page snapped shut. The market murmured its verdict. Too much, too bold, too something. Heat rushed to Ava's face, but she did not run. If ruin had to happen, she would face it with her spine straight. A shadow lengthened across the overturned apples. A man stepped out from the ring of onlookers, tall enough to block the sun. Leather apron thrown over a trail coat, broad hands nicked with the honest cuts of work. Dark hair tied back from eyes the color of deep water. He took in the letter, the laughter, the woman standing her ground. "I think there's been a mistake," he said, calm as a hammer set on an anvil. He bowed to Ava as if the market were a ballroom. "Miss Murphy." His gaze cut to Bartholomew, cool, unafraid. A gentleman does not dress cowardice in paper. He went to one knee on the cobbles, not for Bartholomew, not for the crowd, but for her. "My name is Tobias McKinnon. If you'll have me, I'll marry you today, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving you are a queen among women." The market forgot how to breathe. Evangeline Murphy had never expected her courage to be tested beneath the awnings of a market square. She had expected gossip, yes, every mail-order bride did, but not betrayal delivered like a public sentence. She had always been the big girl in Chicago boarding houses, in factory lines where men whistled not out of admiration, but mockery. Yet she had cultivated gentleness like a shield, a warm smile for seamstresses with blistered hands, a loaf of bread saved for the boy who swept the stairs. She carried her size with both shame and stubborn pride. It was what it was, and she had learned to bear it. But Copper Falls was different. Here reputations were coin, and hers had been stolen before she could spend it. The laughter stung worse than the letter. Mrs. Henderson's sneer, Blackwood's dismissal, the whispering women at the vegetable stall, they stripped Ava bare, reducing her to a joke in a blue dress. Bartholomew Ashford had courted her by post for 9 months. His letter spoke of refinement, prosperity, a future shared in polished parlors and Sunday pews. She had dared to believe in them. Now, as he stood with spine stiff, using her body as a punchline to save his own dignity, she realized he had wanted an ornament, not a partner. The humiliation might have broken her. If not for the stranger, Tobias McKinnon was not a man who often walked Copper Falls streets. Folks knew of him, the reclusive blacksmith whose forge sat at the mountain's foot, the rancher who had driven off rustlers single-handed. He was whispered about, respected from a distance, feared by men who relied on words more than deeds. Now he stepped forward, his presence as undeniable as thunder. The crowd that had jeered Ava shrank back a little, as if afraid their laughter might carry to his ears. His boots were dust-scarred, his shoulders broad enough to make the sheriff look slight, and his eyes, blue, steady, held no trace of mockery. "Mr. Ashford," Tobias said, voice low, forged in fire and iron, "you have mistaken cruelty for courage." Bartholomew bristled. "You have no part in this matter." "I have a part," Tobias answered, "when a woman is disgraced by falsehood. I saw the photographs you passed around like tobacco cards, and I say this woman is finer than the image, because a picture cannot capture the strength of her spirit." Gasps fluttered like sparrows. No one contradicted him. Ava trembled not from shame, but from a dawning recognition. Here was a man who looked at her without measuring, without smirking. His eyes said she was more than the sum of a cruel letter and the body she carried. His words rang like justice, and when he bent one knee, declaring himself before all of Copper Falls, the market's cruelty turned suddenly small, mere gnats before the certainty of a mountain. The market's jeers faded behind them, replaced by the creak of wagon wheels and the rhythm of hooves on the mountain road. Tobias McKinnon guided the team with steady hands, his shoulders cutting a silhouette against the fading afternoon light. Beside him, wrapped in a woolen blanket he had pulled from beneath the seat, Ava sat in silence. She clutched the edges of the blanket, not because of the chill, though the October air bit sharp enough, but because she still could not believe what had happened. Only an hour ago she had been a woman abandoned, her future torn apart by ink and cowardice. Now she was a betrothed again, her name tied to a man whose kindness unsettled her more than any insult had. Tobias broke the silence first. "The road's rougher, past the ridge. Hold on to the rail." His voice was deep, but not harsh. It carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed without question. Yet there was gentleness threaded through it, as though he spoke not to command, but to assure. Ava nodded, clutching the rail. I don't know what to say to you." "You don't need to," he said simply. "Words won't mend the hurt of what they did. But time will, and I'll see to it that no one ever lays such shame on you again." The wagon climbed higher, leaving Copper Falls a smear of smoke and rooftops far below. Pines crowded the slopes, their needles whispering in the wind. The scent of sap and cold stone filled the air, mingling with the earthy smell of horses. Somewhere in the distance a stream tumbled down rocks, its murmur like a hymn against the silence. Tobias reached beneath the seat again and handed her a small tin wrapped in cloth. "It's venison stew, still warm. Eat. You've had nothing since morning." Ava hesitated. She was used to hungry eyes watching her when she ate, used to whispers about a woman of her size needing no more food. But Tobias's gaze was different. It was matter of fact, as though offering her nourishment was no more remarkable then handing her the reins. She ate, spoon trembling, and warmth spread through her chest as much from the act as from the stew. He didn't watch her eat. Instead, he kept his eyes on the trail, giving her the gift of privacy. When the sun began to sink, Tobias pulled the wagon into a sheltered clearing by the river. He set about unhitching the horses and building a fire with practiced ease. "I'll pitch the tent," he said, "but you'll sleep inside the wagon tonight. Safer. Warmer." Eva opened her mouth to protest. After all, she should be the one to give way. But the words died when she saw the care in his face. He wasn't making a gesture to impress her. He was simply being himself. Later, as flames licked the night sky, Tobias handed her a mug of coffee and sat across from her. For the first time, she saw him without the distraction of the market's eyes or the jostle of the wagon. His features were cut strong, but it was his stillness that struck her most. A man rooted, unshaken, as if storms had passed over him but never broken him. "Why?" she whispered, unable to keep the question inside any longer. "Why step forward for me when the whole town was ready to laugh?" Tobias met her gaze across the fire. "Because I saw you." He said it as though it were the simplest truth in the world. Not the dress, not the jeers. You, a woman with dignity enough to stand when others would have run. And I decided that was the kind of strength I wanted beside me. The fire popped. The river sang. Eva lowered her eyes, tears gathering not from shame this time, but from a fragile, dangerous hope. The road wound higher still the next morning, until the air grew thin and crisp, scented with pine and snow. By the time Tobias pulled the wagon into a wide meadow ringed by mountain ridges, Ava's breath caught, not just from the climb, but from the sight. There it was, Pine Ridge Ranch. A sturdy cabin of hewn logs stood against the slope, its chimney trailing smoke into the autumn sky. Corrals stretched wide with horses nickering in the morning light. Beyond, she glimpsed a barn with timber doors and fields golden with the last hay of the season. It was not the polished grandeur of Boston, but something truer, a kingdom carved from wilderness, strong and alive. Tobias climbed down and held out his hand. She hesitated. Her fingers were chapped, her palms still trembling, but he waited without impatience. At last, she placed her hand in his, and he lifted her gently to the ground as though she weighed nothing at all. "Welcome home," he said simply. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth. A great stone fireplace dominated the main room, its mantel lined with ironwork Tobias had forged himself. A long table bore the marks of use, but was polished to a soft shine. She noticed details everywhere: curtains of blue calico, shelves neatly stacked with books, a quilt folded across the settle. This was no empty bachelor's hideaway. It was a place prepared for life to be shared. "This is your room," Tobias said, pushing open a door. Eva gasped. The chamber was small, but it held a wide bed dressed in patchwork quilts, a dresser, and even a little washstand. A vase of dried lavender stood on the windowsill. "I've kept it ready," Tobias admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Always thought maybe someday." She touched the quilt with reverent fingers. No one had ever prepared such a space for her. Not in Chicago, where she had rented corners of other women's lives. Not in Copper Falls, where she had been displayed and discarded. For the first time, she felt claimed, not as property, but as someone worth making room for. The days settled into rhythm. In the mornings, Tobias rose early to tend the forge or ride the range, but he always left a pot of coffee warming on the hearth for her. At noon, they worked side by side, mending fences, feeding stock, gathering eggs. Tobias never laughed at her clumsy grip on a hammer. Instead, he guided her hand, steady as stone. "Not too hard. Let the weight do the work," he said, his palm brushing hers until she blushed. Evenings brought quiet companionship. Ava discovered she could cook hearty meals from his larder, roasts, stews, even pies with the late apples. Tobias always insisted she eat first, and when she apologized for taking extra, he silenced her with a single look. "You're not a burden. You're my blessing." Little gestures gathered weight. He built a stool so she could reach the higher shelves. He sharpened a small knife for her to keep by her side, murmuring, "Every queen deserves her sword." And when a storm rattled the shutters one night, he sat by her bed, humming a low, wordless tune until she fell asleep. Slowly, the shame Copper Falls had carved into her began to loosen its hold. She laughed again, real and unguarded, and the sound filled the cabin like music. One evening, as they shelled beans by lamplight, Ava looked up and caught him watching her, not with hunger, not with pity, but with something steadier, something that promised she would never be alone again. Her heart whispered a truth she hardly dared breathe. Perhaps she was not a cast-off. Perhaps she was exactly where she was meant to be. The peace of Pine Ridge could not last untouched. As autumn deepened and snow dusted the peaks, whispers from Copper Falls began to drift upward with the mountain winds. Bartholomew Ashford had not forgotten the humiliation he suffered at the market. A man like him, vain, proud, desperate to maintain his standing, would not let such a wound fester quietly. Ava noticed it first in the glances when they came down for supplies. Women who once laughed behind their hands now offered syrupy greetings. Men who had sneered tipped their hats, eager to align themselves with Tobias's wealth and reputation. But beneath the civility, a new undercurrent pulsed, rumors Bartholomew himself had sown. "She tricked him," one merchant muttered as he wrapped their flour. "He only married her to spite Ashford," another claimed at the saloon. "Mail-order bride with secrets, you'll see." Ava felt the weight of every whisper. Tobias brushed them aside with a grunt. Words are wind. But she saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hand lingered near the iron revolver he wore only on trips to town. Then came the letter, delivered by a trembling boy, sealed in gaudy red wax. It bore Bartholomew's signature. Tobias read it aloud at the cabin table, his voice low and controlled. "Miss Murphy remains legally bound to me by our written agreement. The so-called marriage you flaunt is invalid. If she does not return to Copper Falls within 30 days, I shall pursue legal remedies. And the law, gentlemen though it may be, rarely favors women of her sort." Ava's hand shook as she clutched the edge of the table. He can't mean it. He abandoned me." Tobias's eyes darkened. "He means to claim what he threw away, not because he wants you, Ava, but because he can't stand to see you wanted by another." She swallowed, her throat raw. "If the court believes him, if they say our marriage isn't real, then I'll fight until the last breath," Tobias growled. "You are my wife, in God's eyes and in mine. No paper can undo that." But the letter unearthed something in Ava she had long buried, shame so deep it felt like chains. She confessed it that night by the fire, her face turned away. "I've always been afraid someone would find a reason to send me back back to being unwanted, back to being nothing. Maybe Bartholomew is right. Maybe I don't belong anywhere. Tobias moved beside her, his hand covering hers with steady warmth. You belong here, with me. Do you hear me, Ava? I don't care if every judge in the territory lines up at our door. I'll stand against them all. And yet, she could not silence the fear. Not when the world beyond their cabin was ruled by men like Bartholomew, who twisted contracts and courted favor in parlors and saloons. Tobias was strength and steel, but Eva wondered, would that be enough against the weight of society's scorn? The question lingered in the cabin shadows, even as snow began to fall in earnest. Winter pressed its hand hard against the mountains. Snow blanketed the ridge, firelight flickered in the cabin's windows, and for a time Ava and Tobias lived in a cocoon of warmth. Yet the threat in Bartholomew's letter hung over them like a storm cloud that refused to break. It broke one morning in January. The sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Too many to be casual travelers. Tobias rose from the hearth where he'd been sharpening his axe, his face hardening into the grim mask of a man preparing for battle. Ava's heart thudded as she peered through the frosted glass. A line of riders wound up the trail, Bartholomew at their head, smug as a general, with the county sheriff and 2 deputies trailing close behind. They brought the law, Tobias muttered, or their version of it. The knock rattled the door like gunfire. Tobias opened it, shoulders squared. Bartholomew smirked from the saddle, his fine coat dusted with snow. "McKinnon," he called, "I'm here for what belongs to me. Evangeline Murphy, contracted to wed me in writing. You're harboring her unlawfully." Ava stepped into the doorway before Tobias could block her. "You left me humiliated at the market. You tore up that contract yourself." Bartholomew's eyes narrowed, sharp with triumph. "Contracts don't dissolve with words, my dear. The law is on my side. Sheriff, do your duty." The sheriff shifted uneasily in his saddle. He was a man more comfortable enforcing whiskey taxes than tearing women from their homes. Still, under Bartholomew's glare, he cleared his throat. "McKinnon, Miss Murphy must come with us until this is settled proper." "No." Tobias's voice cut like steel on stone. "She is my wife. She stays." His hand rested on the revolver at his hip, calm but unyielding. Bartholomew laughed. "You think you can stand against the law? Against me? You're a blacksmith hiding in the hills. I am Copper Falls. Without me, this town would starve." "You may own banks," Tobias said, stepping onto the porch, "but you don't own her." Tension snapped tight as a drawn bowstring. Deputies shifted, hands hovering near holsters. Ava felt the world narrowing. Snow, sky, the pounding of her own blood. She could not let Tobias face this alone. Gathering every shred of courage, she stepped forward, her voice carrying across the frozen yard. "Sheriff, listen to me. Bartholomew Ashford abandoned me. He declared our union void in front of the entire market. Dozens of people heard it. And now he comes not for love or honor, but because Tobias chose me." Murmurs rippled among the deputies. The sheriff frowned, uneasy. Tobias's arm brushed against hers, a silent acknowledgment, a vow that they stood together. Bartholomew sneered, but cracks showed in his confidence. "She's lying. Enough!" Tobias's voice thundered over him. "If you want to drag her away, you'll have to step over me. And I promise you, Bartholomew, you won't make it past the porch." The sheriff raised a hand quickly. "That won't be necessary. I've heard enough to know this isn't for me to settle today. If there's to be judgment, it'll be in court, not with bullets in the snow." Bartholomew sputtered, but the sheriff turned his horse, signaling retreat. The deputies followed. Left without their backing, Bartholomew sat frozen for a moment, his face red with fury, before yanking his reins and galloping down the trail. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of snow against the eaves. Tobias slid his arm around Eva's shoulders, pulling her close. "You stood tall today," he murmured. "Your voice stopped them cold." Eva leaned into him, trembling but proud. "We stood tall together." The threat was not gone, but the battle had been fought, and for the first time Eva knew her courage was as much a weapon as Tobias's strength. The mountain was quiet again. Outside, the snow had covered the tracks of hooves, smoothing over the violence of the morning. Inside, the cabin glowed with lamplight and the steady crackle of the fire. Eva sat near the hearth, a quilt around her shoulders, the warmth slowly sinking into her bones. Tobias poured her a cup of tea brewed from mountain herbs, setting it carefully in her hands as though it were the most precious china. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was not empty, but heavy with everything they had faced, and everything still waiting beyond the ridge. Bartholomew would not give up easily. The law was fickle, swayed by money and influence. They both knew the fight was not yet over, and yet, here in the circle of firelight, there was safety. Tobias settled beside her, his broad frame folding into the chair with a sigh. He reached for her hand, rough palm warm against her trembling fingers. "You're safe here," he said quietly. His voice was steady, the kind of steady that could hold up a world. Ava's eyes blurred with tears, but they were different from the tears she'd shed in the market square. These were soft, full of relief and hope. She turned toward him, whispering through the knot in her throat, "Is this really my home now?" Tobias's grip tightened, and he met her gaze with that unwavering calm. "It's your home, if you'll have it, always." The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Snow tapped at the window like a gentle hand. Ava leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart swelling with the fragile certainty of belonging. Outside, the world still waited with its judgments, its trials, its cruel tongues. But in that moment, the cabin was their fortress, and love was their shield. Whether it would be enough to withstand the storms ahead, well, that was a question only time could answer. Every time I finish telling a story like this, I'm reminded of how deeply love can transform even the harshest moments. Ava was mocked in front of an entire town, left to carry shame that wasn't hers. But in the end, she found someone who saw her worth more clearly than anyone else. Stories like these connect us across distances, times, and cultures because they whisper the same truth. Real love does not measure beauty by size or wealth. It recognizes the soul. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening to this story? What part touched your heart the most? If you still believe that love can appear in the most unexpected places, don't go anywhere. The next story is waiting for you.